This is going to be kind of an off-the-cuff kind of episode. Because it's interesting. I just thought of this. And it might actually help you to deal with this thing that I'm going to be talking about a lot easier, because there's no personality or taking things personal in whatever this if this works properly. So one interesting idea that I came up with today, just a couple of minutes ago, like a minute or two ago, was that the ego, or certain thoughts, not necessarily the ego, because the ego doesn't really exist. It does exist, but it doesn't exist the way people think it does. As some thing or some entity that exists. What it is a collection of what I'm going to start calling thought forms. So, whenever a thought gets out of control, or whatever thought is out of your control, and you're not thinking this thought, what you can do is you can actually call it a thought form at this point. So, to understand this, you might want to understand what a thought form is. So, what's a thought form? Basically, a thought form is something that you create with your thoughts, attention, imagination, visualization, and that kind of like can work within them on their own, and they don't really need your help or your guidance once created and once started. So this is really an interesting way of seeing the ego, as a bunch of thought forms, kind of like coagulated together. Now, I'm not saying that this is accurate or inaccurate or anything. I'm just giving you a way of looking at this process, because that's really what's happening anyways. I mean, you really can't, for the most part, control your thoughts. The only thoughts you control are the ones that are, that are kind of like you in some ways. There are some thoughts that you can kind of think, in that sense that you can control them, because they're new, they're not created yet. Versus the thought forms that are already created and already controlled, and thus are already created and thus cannot be controlled. And in the way of thoughts, anyways. At least not without some prior help. And this is what this episode is about. Like, if you don't know that they're thought forms, you're going to be controlled by them, because you think that you can control your thoughts, or you think they're just thoughts. Oh, they're just thoughts. But if you don't realize that they're actually separate creations, which is true, in a sense, and that they're not actually a part of you, which is true, and as a matter of fact are themselves a kind of like program that's running in the background, which is true, then you can't control them in the usual way. There are people who say that you cannot consciously think a thought. You're not the thinker and this type of thing, which is partially true. It's mostly true it's pretty much always true in regards to these thought forms. Well, you can think thoughts, and you are a thinker to a small degree, but most of your thoughts end up becoming thought forms, and that's one of the reasons why they take you over so quickly. So this is a new understanding, and this hopefully might actually give you some insight on to how the ego works, and some insight on how to deal with this problem effectively. So, how do you deal with a thought form when that's been created and now that's taking control, now it's taking over? How do you deal with this problem? Well, number one, you have to see it as a thought form. Number one, that's like the most fundamental thing here. Seeing it as a thought form, seeing it as what it is, This is extremely important if you want to understand what's happening here. Because if you think that these thoughts are just thoughts, oh boy. But if you think they're thought forms, oh boy, you can actually do something about these things. You can actually control them in a way. And it's not something that you can do with thoughts for the most part. Like, you can, but it's more of a realization that happens. And before, you thought you were through your thoughts, or maybe you thought you could control your thoughts, but now you realize that these thoughts aren't actually, the typical thought. Because the reason why people get, the reason why this is a problem when it comes to thought forms is because thought forms aren't typical thoughts. They're running on their own kind of in the background, and they don't really have input from you at all. And so what is needed is to deactivate this thought form, to take the energy from this thought form. There's a couple of ways of doing this. You can actually visualize yourself turning off this thought form. Maybe there's like a knob or a switch or something that turns off this thought form. You can turn it off that way. You then take it and then throw it in the incinerator, and then and then all the energy that came into it then comes back into you. You can visualize it in that way. That way you can get rid of many thought forms at once. But if you try and do it the way most people do it, with the thoughts conscious, it's not going to work as well. And you're going to have resistance and fighting, which is going to actually give them more energy, or give more energy to the resistance thought form that exists. Another thing you can do is calm these thoughts down. Now that makes it sound like I'm saying that you can control these thoughts, but that's not actually what's happening. What's actually happening is that you are giving input into these thoughts. Doesn't mean you're controlling them, because control implies that you can consciously say, calm down thoughts, and consciously will them to calm down. That's not what's happening here. It's more like when you give them this input, because you are their creator, you can actually influence them in this way. And so they can then calm down. There's a couple of ways of doing this. You can say things like, because there's an episode I've talked about before called "The Ego Is Not Your Enemy." I made this part of this episode as well. Going into this process, just say you are safe. There's nothing going on. Everything is happening for my highest good. But really, the thing to say is just say, yeah, like, you are safe. Everything's okay. Nothing's going on. This type of thing. And depending on what you think of as your highest good, and if you think that's a good thing or not, you can say that as well. So there's many things to do with this information, and I'm sure you can come up with even more than I did here. This is just a short episode to kind of get you started on this idea, and hopefully get you to actually fix your thoughts in some way. Just a interesting idea that I hope has some effect in your life in the future. This is David Speaks, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.